Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, March 8th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 178 days. The game against Michigan in 262 days. I am here in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center for the first time in a little while. I'm joined by Kevin Noon of BuckeyeHuddle.com. We just watched the Buckeyes' first practice of the spring. You know, the first practice, Kevin, it's always kind of a fun sort of, you pressing the reset button a little bit. Get some new guys in here. You know, some of the guys who you've seen for years and years aren't here anymore. What was the one thing that maybe jumped out to you the most just day one? You don't want to read too much into day one, but what was the one thing that kind of jumped out to you when you got to watch this morning?
Why is a quarterback wearing 33?
Yeah, that is a fair question.
That was the thing that jumped out the most to me. I mean, you asked me the question and I answered it. I mean, because yeah, the names change, the numbers certainly change. I mean, we can get into that in a minute. Who's wearing 20? I mean, some things like that. But Devin Brown wearing 33 certainly kind of threw me for a little bit of a loop. I thought when I saw it on the roster, I'm like, damn it, Bassford, missing the number on there, but apparently it's correct.
It is correct, yes. That is a little bit of a Sammy Ball homage. The old TCU quarterback, someone who Devin Brown's father was a big fan of, apparently. So, yes, quarterback number 33 versus quarterback number 6, Kyle McCord, in the battle for the starting job this spring. And, I mean, let's talk a little bit about that quarterback battle, since that is sort of going to be the storyline that draws the most interest this spring, I would say. There was you saw not a lot from either guy. It was very basic kind of check down type passing and some handoffs and that kind of stuff. This is very, very 101 level stuff that they're repping day one. But I think of anything, the thing that I maybe took the most from it was not the same guy going first every time. They really are just kind of rotating and taking their turns.
Yeah, absolutely, because you do have a quarterback battle going on here. I mean, you can't just sit there and line one guy up and say, well, you're going to get all the ones and you're going to get all the twos. Then is it truly a quarterback battle if you're doing that? So it was, we got an opportunity to see a little bit of throwing. I mean, a couple little swing type things, but nothing downfield. I'm sure they waited until we were ushered off into our isolation chamber before they went and did anything cool. But it is just day one, so I know there are a lot of people who would like to have a lot of answers. I think we would like to have some answers too, but then again, what would we talk about for the rest of spring practice? So, you're going to have to keep it locked in here as we get, little drips and drabs of information on that one.
And, day one of spring practice is just sort of a little bit of a baseline to set that then you can judge when we're back here on Thursday, when we're back here in 2 weeks after they're on spring break. You can sort of see, okay, what has changed? And that sort of shows you maybe who's maybe taking a little bit of a leap, who's maybe taking a step back. This is just day one, so this is just sort of like let's establish the baseline. This is the like a clinical trial. This is the the safety group, the control group. Okay, now we have our control group for the spring, and now we can perform the scientific method on the Ohio State football team and see what has changed.
You are the placebo.
Thank you very much. I think one spot where I think that's especially true is on the offensive line, because we've done a bunch of shows talking about the offensive line and the fact that, well, we know there are going to be 5 players up there, and we know that Donovan Jackson and Matt Jones are going to be 2 of them, and we're pretty sure Josh Fryer is going to be one of them, but we don't know where he's going to be. Well, on day one, Josh Fryer was at left tackle, and then Donovan Jackson at left guard, and then Carson Hinsman at center, Matt Jones at right guard, and then Zen Michalski at right tackle, but Tegra Shabola was also kind of right there and sometimes stepping in with the ones as well. So it feels like that's, those are probably 6 names that you would have had in the top 6 to 7 of your depth chart going into the spring, and it feels like, okay, at least as of day one, that's sort of where things stand right now.
Right, and it's going to be so important, because if they come out of spring and they don't feel good about the tackle positions, do they have to dip back into the portal? Every time you bring somebody in, somebody's got to leave. I mean, if you're sitting at that 85 cap, so it's just a lot more than just saying, well, we're going to go out and get something. You're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, and then they're going to be gone. So, the Josh Fryer news was probably less surprising than anything, but seeing Tegra and seeing Zim Michalski out there as well, that was, that answered a lot of questions, because there were a lot of names that were mentioned there, and there are some guys that are through 3 years, and it is only practice one, but you got to wonder what their future is going to be, and I'll be interested leading all the way up to the spring game and seeing how those reps are split up and how things are going to look there. But yeah, offensive line certainly, behind quarterback, and is the defense fixed, is probably the biggest question that a lot of people have.
Yeah, and before we move to the defense, real quick, I'll just mention, you mentioned the transfers and, bringing in a transfer to bolster the offensive line. They did bring in a transfer to bolster the offensive line. It was Victor Cutler transferring from Louisiana Monroe. He was kind of repping second at center, and that's another one of those things where you don't want to read too much into it right now, because you got to remember, this was his first time ever attending an Ohio State football practice. So, as Ryan Day talked about with Quinn Ewers a couple of years ago, he's still trying to figure out, where the locker room is and all that kind of stuff. And
yeah, you could bring in Jalen Carter as a transfer, and I think practice one, you're still going to have to sit there and be like, well, you got to understand, period one is punt.
And figuring out here's how we do stuff, and demonstrating, here's how we do this drill, because this is the first time a lot of these guys have maybe been out here doing some of these drills with the coaches. So you have a veteran guy out there sort of demonstrating stuff, and then you step in. And this is one of the things where 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now when we're in here, let's see if Vic Cutler is ahead of Carson Hinsman, or if Carson Hinsman's still ahead of Victor Cutler. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we're looking for during the course of the spring. And hey, have they decided that Josh Fryer needs to play on the right side, and then Zed Mahalski needs to play on the left, or whatever? Tager Shabola has taken the lead. This is the kind of stuff that we're looking for. Knowing where you sort of started the spring is what makes that really useful, that information later kind of more useful. Now on to the defense. We did get a chance to talk to Jim Knowles after practice, and this is year 2 for him now. So you're having the novelty of the jack position has kind of worn off. Last year it was I kept flashing back to the 2018 season when now they have the bullet, and the bullet is the story that we have to keep talking about because it's a new position, which means it's shiny and exciting and new. How much did the bullet end up making a difference on the Ohio State defense? Well, we're out of time. Hey, let's talk about the jack position. And so now the jack position is no longer shiny and new. And it sounds like the jack position is maybe something that's not going to be as big of a factor this year, because they're sort of changing their focus just based on personnel more than anything.
Well, let's remember, too, that the jack position was the Leo position, but nobody had earned the king of the jungle. So it was the jack, and now, they're still trying to figure out, what fits best with the personnel, because there's always that balance when you have a system. How much do you try and put people into the right positions and within your system, and how much do you adjust your defense to fit the personnel that you have? We're going to get an opportunity as time goes on, as Mitchell Melton, who has been cleared to go through some individual work, some position work, but they're not going to push him too far. I mean, he was somebody who could have fit into that position, but, a name that fans love out there has found a new old home in terms of where he's going to play, and I think that made a lot of people happy in our chat as we were live streaming the Jim Knowles presser.
Yeah, and that is Jack Sawyer. Jack Sawyer it sounds like he played some of the jack last year. He played some of the defensive end. They're maybe looking at keeping him more at that sort of traditional defensive end spot this year, which, that's one of those things where if you're dividing your focus between two positions, like that could be great because it gives you flexibility, but also it can mean you don't have as much time to work on one thing and develop at that one thing. And did that maybe hold back his development a little bit last year? It sounds like maybe they feel like it did. So he will be more of a traditional defensive end, and you've got him, and you got JT Tuimoloau, you got Caden Curry, probably the top 3 defensive ends there. And then the question is, does Caden Curry move? Does Caden Curry play a little bit at jack? It does sound like Mitchell Melton is kind of the number 1 guy at jack right now. Mentioned C.J. Hicks's name as a possibility there at one point, but the fact that Mitchell Melton is not going to be full go this spring, he's doing mostly individual stuff, not necessarily doing 11-on-11 things yet, as he recovers from that knee injury he suffered during last year's spring game. Without him out there, they're not going to be focused as much on that, and that'll kind of be something that gets ramped up more as he comes back. So that gives you a pretty good sense of what they're thinking about positionally there. One thing that was really interesting to me is we get the new roster as the spring starts, which then you start scanning through and look at jersey number changes, height changes, weight changes, and one of the young defensive ends, second-year defensive ends, Amari Abor, is up, I think, 19 pounds over last year, and is now, I think it was 268, and, now he's someone who, you look at him and it's like, okay, he's no longer the undersized freshman, now he's someone who, behind Tuimoloau, behind Sawyer, behind Caden Curry, maybe he and Kenyatta Jackson are now ready to maybe take a little bit of a bigger role there.
Yeah, with Abor, I remember covering him in high school, going down and seeing him at Duncanville in Texas, and I'm like, this kid has a huge frame on him. I think you're going to be able to hang some more weight on him. The freshman 15 certainly found him, but I can assure you his was done smartly and wisely. Mine was done on beer and Kentucky Hut.
Yeah, it is. You can gain. They talk about good weight and bad weight, and it seems like good weight for Amari Abor there. And he's someone who now a second year. He and Kenyatta Jackson have the opportunity to maybe take another step. The linebackers, it's going to be a little harder for those second-year linebackers to get on the field because you still have Tommy Eichenberg, you still have Cody Simon, you still have Steele Chambers at linebacker. So it's going to be harder for some of those younger guys to get on the field. The coaches were asked about that. They were asked about Gabe Powers and C.J. Hicks and Reed Carrico, and it sounds like, they have the opportunity to move forward this spring, but those are not guys who are necessarily. I mean, that is going to be a tough path to the playing field this fall in their second year.
Right, but there is the hope to get some guys some more playing time if they can get out there and grasp it. Certainly, like a Cody Simon. Mm-hmm. You talked about Reed Carrico. He's still bouncing around from positions. It sounds like he could be a Sam when they face 12 personnel going against two tights. I mean, obviously, C.J. Hicks, if you've been following on social media, some of the Ohio State posts, I mean, he looks all rocked up. Gabe Powers is somebody we haven't talked about a lot. He was kind of a tweener. I'm still waiting to see if he slides down at some point. This will probably be a very pivotal year in terms of where his development goes. But with Tommy and with Steele, it's crowded. The ceiling above you is real.
And then the last group I wanted to talk about was the cornerback room, and you've got a pretty good deep group there. That's a spot where between some recruiting misses, some late flips, some injuries, that has been a spot where they've been thin a bunch in previous years. Right now, and again, this is day one of spring ball, so okay, there's lots of time for stuff to change between here and the Indiana game, but day one of spring ball, they've got some pretty good depth there. And you saw Denzel Burke out there with Jordan Hancock as the ones. You saw Davis Igbinosun, the transfer from Ole Miss, out there with Jair Brown as the twos. And then the threes were Jermaine Matthews and Ryan Turner. And, to have 6 healthy scholarship cornerbacks right now, that's a pretty big luxury. And then when you have a guy who, in Igbinosun, was a 9-10 game starter last year for Ole Miss, as, right now as your third or fourth guy, that's a real luxury.
Right, and don't forget that Calvin Simpson-Hunt will show up in the summer as well, but they do have some depth, and it was a position that we talk about how running back kind of fell apart due to injuries. Well, corner fell apart much quicker. Mm-hmm. And now you have, kind of the fruits of your labor there. Jair Brown has started games. Everybody except Ryan Turner really has started games and has gone through some action. So now you have some opportunity to kind of mix and match and try and figure it out. And we're not necessarily in the days of Ohio State. It's like, we're playing 3 corners, love it, like it, leave it, doesn't matter, we're playing 3 corners. Now Ohio State has some flexibility. You ride the hot hand, but we saw how important depth was last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question. And you have built some additional depth because of how difficult it was last year. You've added some additional depth because of bringing in Igbinosun, and then you've obviously got a couple freshmen coming in this year as well, and Jermaine Matthews and Calvin Simpson-Hunt. So, yeah, that is going to be a position to watch. If you want much more coverage of this first day of Ohio State spring football practice, Tony Gerdeman and I did an episode of Buckeye Weekly. You can get a little more in depth on some of the stuff on there. You can also find all of our coverage at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We had our full coverage team out on Tuesday morning for the first practice of the spring. Mark Givler was out here as well. Lots of written content, lots of video content, podcasts, interviews with players and coaches, all that great stuff, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com and at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. And if you prefer to listen in podcast form instead of watching on YouTube, you can listen to a whole bunch of that at just search Buckeye Huddle on whatever podcast platform you like. If you're listening to this as a podcast, just search Buckeye Huddle. You'll find all of our shows, lots of great content there. And this is going to be a busy month or so of recruiting, a busy month or so of developing the 2023 Ohio State team, and then potentially setting up, transfers in, transfers out, what's going to change. This is just the start of a very long journey for this team, but we'll be here for all of it. So make sure you follow along all of those wonderful places for all of that. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.